Actually, you can make her a co-host as well, since you were a co-host.
Yep, I'm going to try to do that right now. Let me see. To see if I can do that. That's weird. Does not give me the option to make her a co-host. Okay, Jeremy will do that when he gets.
All right, so we're being live streamed, so I will make her a co-host then. Denise, you are the one who's going to be controlling the deck?
No, I believe that's Eileen, right, Eugenia? So she
So
should
then,
be.
Natasha, we don't need to make her co-host.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem.
How are the kids, Jeremy?
Everybody seems to be all right. They just had their dinner. I have to wait a couple of hours, but they had their dinner.
That's very important.
Exactly. Well, I rushed home to make sure I could feed them before this meeting.
Because if they're hungry, they're not going to be happy.
That's right. And then we'll all pay. How are you doing, Joan?
Oh, not bad, thank God. Interesting day, huh?
Yeah, it's almost 6. Who's the governor? We'll see what tomorrow brings.
Ay, 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 ay.
Well, speaking of almost 6, I have 6 now, so I'm going to start the webinar. We'll see attendees start to show up and populate.
Okay.
Hopefully. Okay, so now we have some attendees starting. And I spoke to Zach earlier, so he should be here any second.
Okay.
Eileen, I'm told you're the one. Hang on. Eileen? I'm told you're the one I should make co-host. You're muted. Everybody else, everybody's muted right now. I think I lost Eileen.
Yeah, I don't see her no more.
Yeah,
Maybe signing back in.
yep.
So it should be Eileen and Eugenia who you make co-hosts.
Okay, Eileen's back.
Yeah.
So I only need to make the person who's controlling the deck the co-host.
So Eileen.
Okay, so I just made her co-host. We are still waiting for our chairperson, however. I'm going to text them.
And I believe if Sean Macias can have the ability for, he's also from the bike unit, if he's able to speak as a panelist as well.
I can elevate him to panelist. Give me one moment.
Oh, thank you.
I didn't know that was DOT's Sean Macias. So I thank you for pointing that out. And here's Zach now. You're muted, Zach.
Better?
Better. Whenever you're ready to start, just ask me to call roll.
Okay, how our presenters are here from DOT and
Our presenters are here. Anybody else? Oh, Keith, good seeing you. I haven't seen you. I didn't see you before.
sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. Yes, why don't you call roll and let's get started.
Okay. So I am going to mute everybody and I'm going to call roll. I'm only calling roll for members of committee. If you are a board member, but not a committee member, I will mark your attendance and I will note it at some point during the meeting. So I'm muting everybody now. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, acknowledge that I've called you, and then mute yourself again. Everybody's muted, and please remember to unmute yourself. So Zachary J.C.
Here.
Thank you. John Garcia. Joan Body.
Here.
Thank you. Joseph Canali. John DeLuper.
Right here, present.
Thank you. David Estrada. Roberto Martinez. Roberto A. Martinez.
I'm here, present.
Thank you. Marilyn Melman. Gloria Rodriguez Navoa. Cindy Vandenbosch.
Present.
Thank you. Katie Walsh. And I'm going to note the others' attendance, and it's all yours, Zach.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you're having a lovely summer and enjoying this beautiful weather. So tonight we're going to have a presentation from the DOT concerning the 20th Street truck routes and a new proposal they have for updating this truck route, which we've been working on for some time now. So who's here to present from the DOT?
I'll be presenting along with Eugenia Tang. And Sean Macias and Denise Mendes are also with us.
Great. Hi, guys. Thanks for being here. Nice to see you again. But without further ado, you guys are pleased with your presentation, and everyone that's always hold your questions till the end. We'll all get a chance to ask all our questions. And thank you so much.
Great, thank you so much. So again, my name is Eileen Bonney. I'm a senior project manager with the bicycle unit. Eugenia Tang will also be presenting with me tonight. She's a freight planner with Freight Mobility Unit. So we're going to go through a lot of information tonight, going through the background of the project area, the existing conditions of the corridors, and route selection. And then we're going to go through the proposal details, starting with 20th Street and some connections to that proposal. After that, we'll talk about the proposal for 21st Street, which is a bike boulevard proposal. And at the end, we have a bit more information on the technical side of how these work together. As you said, we'd be happy to take questions at the end. So the project area, as you know, is shown on both maps here. To the left is the New York City truck route map. On the right is the bicycle network map to give some extra context to this proposal area. Our goals include upgrading the existing 20th Street truck route design, lessening the effects of truck travel in the immediate neighborhood. And an additional goal is to create a new bike network connection, closing gaps between the waterfront greenway and parks and creating new amenities along the way. And next, I'll share some background on the project motivation, the planning context, and the focus areas. So as you just mentioned earlier, this project initiated from community requests years ago with 20th Street. And since those initial requests, we have now an updated analysis and an updated street design toolkit to address the corridor with. There's also now the changing nature of deliveries and e-commerce. And we're seeing more and more people walking, jogging, biking along this corridor for recreation, especially along the cemetery edge where they use the road. And so we also see commuting and deliveries by bike increasing as well throughout the areas. So to speak to how this fits in with the greater comprehensive planning context, there are a number of plans and initiatives that are tied in with this project. First, the recently released Smart Truck Management Plan called Delivering New York will seek to update the New York City truck route network and implement new street design standards. Next, the Green Wave Plan for cycling in New York City was released recently in 2019, and that calls for building 20 miles of protected bike lanes annually, and also introducing new street design treatments, including bike boulevards. The Open Street Initiative, which started in 2020, was made permanent, and then the mayor's office announced plans for DOT to convert an open street to a bike boulevard in each borough this year. Also, the Brooklyn Waterfront Greenway, as you know, is in development. And some exciting news is that construction's already starting down on the 3rd Avenue and Hamilton Avenue segments, which would link to this project. And finally, the city bike expansion has recently come to the area. So we are seeing more people biking throughout the neighborhood. And this project does have a number of focus areas that complement each other, and we'll speak more to the details of each throughout the proposal section. But first, just to introduce that with the existing truck route, we're looking to address the issues of very narrow two-way truck route through the one-way conversion to create more space. Next, the proposal seeks to incorporate the new bike network connections, linking the new waterfront greenway down at 3rd Avenue up to Prospect Park to the east and also to the existing bike network. And third, we do want to minimize traffic and cut through traffic on neighborhood streets after trucks would be rerouted. And particularly along 21st Street, there's an opportunity with the bike boulevard to increase pedestrian safety and enhancements at the intersections for that as well. Next, I'll pass it to Eugenia.
First, I want to apologize for the ice cream truck that you might hear in the background. So I'll jump right in and I'll talk through how the street and traffic network functions today. Next. So 20th Street is a two-way local truck route for the entire stretch. The land use changes from a mix of light industrial to residential use, so it varies quite a bit in terms of how the street functions. For the stretch of 3rd to 7th Avenue, as we've heard, and I'm sure you know as well, the stretch is particularly narrow, especially for two trucks, or even just two larger vehicles would have difficulty passing one another, as shown in the image here. So parked cars tend to mount onto the curb to avoid being sideswiped and therefore further limiting the available space for on the sidewalk for pedestrians to use. And despite having cyclists riding along 20th Street, there's no dedicated space for cyclists along the entire corridor, just due to the limited space available right now. Next. And going from 7th Avenue to 10th Avenue, 20th Street runs along the entire stretch of Greenwood Cemetery with a narrow 5 feet sidewalk at most, which is substandard as is and not suitable for any person with disabilities to use. Sometimes it's narrower than this, and when there's streetlights or hydrants that can really tighten up the space even further. And as you may be aware of already, joggers and cyclists looking to use this area around the cemetery go into the streets where the sidewalk space is limited, creating an unsafe condition, as you can see in this image here, where you can see children are biking on the streets as well. Eventually, and especially since the pandemic, we've already seen an increase of people looking for ways to exercise and engage in outdoor spaces for recreational use as well. Next. And now looking at the role of the entire 20th Street and the travel patterns, this corridor provides connection from McDonald Avenue to Southwest Brooklyn waterfront and the surrounding local areas. And it also runs parallel to the entire length of the Prospect Expressway. Of the vehicles traveling along 20th Street, 60 to 75% of the traffic travels westbound, and this can be due to the close proximity to the on-ramps to the Prospect Expressway for the eastbound traffic to choose to travel instead. For example, looking at 7th Avenue and 20th Street for the morning peak rush hour, there are significantly more vehicles traveling westbound compared to those going eastbound. Next. Local traffic from 3rd Avenue all the way to 7th Avenue feeds eastbound traffic onto 20th Street if they're heading to McDonald Avenue. These trips generally originate from nearby neighborhoods, with most of them coming from Red Hook, Gowanus, Park Slope, and though trucks have fewer options, other eastbound vehicles are able to access the Prospect Expressway or the Prospect Park Southwest for connecting avenues. Next. For the bike network, there are connections to the Prospect Park and protected bike paths such as 4th Avenue along 9th Street and also the Prospect Park West. But there's still a lack of that east-west bike connection in this area, as you can see in this map here. And recently with the city bike expansion, they were able to add stations around the cemetery, as you can see, with icons here showing the city bike stations on and around 20th and 21st Avenue, 21st Street. Sorry. Next. Which this all leads to a design proposal here, specifically for 20th Street. The design will include a one-way westbound conversion from the streets of 3rd Avenue to McDonald Avenue, along with including a protected bike path, a shared use path, and improving the overall network connections. Next. So we have some cross sections here showing the existing and proposed design. From 3rd to 7th Avenue, we're looking at creating a standard westbound travel and parking lane width to address the current narrow and tight geometric constraints. Currently, the parking regulation from 3rd to 4th Avenue have alternating days of no standing and truck loading zone because the street is too narrow to allow for 2 passing vehicles while keeping parking on both sides without being sideswept. With this design, we're able to address the issue, so we're able to add back the parking on both sides of the street by bringing the width of the travel lane and the parking lane up to standard. This design also allows for a parking protected westbound bike path to allow safety of cyclists to use the streets. For example, of this design, we see this at West 29th Street in Manhattan, where the design is able to accommodate higher traffic volumes and deliveries, while also keeping cyclists separate from the moving and parked cars by having its own dedicated bike lane as well. Next. And between 7th and 10th Avenue, there will be a marked parking lane on the north curb, a westbound travel lane, and the existing parking lane on the south curb will be repurposed for a 14 feet wide, 2-way shared use path running along the cemetery. This would allow for pedestrians, joggers, cyclists to use this dedicated space while being safely separated from the travel lane. And now I'll hand it over to Eileen to talk about the connections from here.
Great, thank you. And so where that 20th Street path would meet up with the bike network to the east, in order to link that over, we're proposing to send cyclists starting at 10th Avenue and 20th Street, where that would end, sending them up to the existing 10th Avenue and 11th Avenue bike lanes. You can see those in that small map to the upper right. So the first link that we're talking about here on this slide is 10th Avenue from 20th Street up to 19th Street. Currently, there are 2 southbound travel lanes and parking on both sides. And we propose in the image on the bottom left to repurpose the parking lane on the west curb of this very short block to the 2-way bike lane design, which would be separated from traffic by bollards. There is an existing bus stop on the west curb, which would be relocated to the far side of the intersection at McDonald Avenue. And this bus stop relocation actually opens up an opportunity to redesign this intersection with concrete. So currently, if you look at the aerial image on the right side, there are only 3 crosswalks and no crosswalk on the south side. And sometimes the northbound vehicles can make that left turn from McDonald to 20th at a bit of a higher speed as well. So with the redesign, we can install concrete curb extensions on both sides to calm traffic, shorten that pedestrian crossing distance, and also improve the space where bus riders would access the bus. And then again, we can also add this new crosswalk on the south leg of the intersection, which is shown in yellow at the bottom here. The blue shows the proposed curb extensions. So all of these enhancements at this intersection could really improve safety and tighten up the geometry. So then for northbound cyclists on 10th Ave on that 2-way path we just showed, they would have 1 more block to travel in order to reach the 11th Avenue bike lane to continue north to Prospect Park. So here we propose a eastbound standard bicycle lane for 1 block of 19th Street from 10th Avenue to 11th Avenue. This is just a straightforward conventional bike lane with no changes to the parking or travel lanes. So a secondary piece of this project is the inclusion of a bicycle boulevard on 21st Street to pair with the 20th Street proposal where that bike lane would be 1-way, the section that Eugenia showed in the beginning. So first, again, with the open streets, this program was initiated in 2020 in response to COVID-19 to give an opportunity for pedestrians and cyclists to access more outdoor space for wellness and recreation. And they were closed to vehicles during the day with no through traffic except for local access. And last year, the mayor's office announced that this program would become permanent. More recently, the mayor's office announced an initiative to convert some of those open streets to bike boulevards, 1 in each borough. So 21st Street between 3rd to 7th Avenue, the orange line up on the map there, was designated as an open street last summer. This location was not quite as successful as some of the others in terms of having a maintenance partner for maintaining the barriers daily. But here, redesigning it as a bike boulevard would allow us to improve the conditions and bring some of those amenities without requiring community partners to maintain it daily. So then what is a bike boulevard? So a bike boulevard is a new treatment. We haven't used it yet in New York City. It has been widely deployed in other cities for several years. And essentially, it's a method of prioritizing bicycle travel through managing vehicle volumes and vehicle speeds, just through redesigns that will slow down the vehicles, but then also to deter cut-through traffic. And these redesigns are focused on intersection treatments here. They could include elements such as mini roundabouts, which cars can still drive around, but it slows them down at their approach. Another method is traffic diverter islands, which allow bikes to continue straight, but vehicles to turn off the corridor to filter out extra traffic that's cutting through the area. Bike boulevard designs can differ greatly depending on the context of the street. So the proposal that we'll share next is unique to 21st Street. And I do want to mention that the bike boulevard would differ from the open street designation in that it won't be closed to vehicles. Local access still would be allowed, but it would discourage the cut-through traffic. So first, let's start with the mid-block treatment markings, since it's a bit more straightforward. 21st Street from 3rd to 7th Avenue is eastbound. It is a direct pair to the westbound 20th Street bike lane, for that same section, 3rd to 7th, where that 20th Street bike lane would be one-way westbound. The context here is a little different from 20th Street, where on 20th, it's critical to separate the cyclists from the trucks on that downhill truck route. On 21st Street here, the contrast is that there's much lighter traffic volumes, mostly passenger vehicles. And so the design here along the block would look very similar to the existing condition. The parking lanes would stay on both sides. The travel lane remains, with the addition of new custom markings and signs that would encourage vehicles to travel slower. These greenback sharrows that you see are a new marking that can be used to add visibility for prioritizing bike travel. Now, as I mentioned, this is primarily an intersection project. So some of the intersection treatments that could be included at 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 7th include painted curb extensions, which can act as a blockbuster on the left, sort of like a chicane, slowing those turns onto the block, or gateway treatment on the right, with wide curb extensions on both sides. And these painted spaces also give an opportunity to add some bike parking into the spaces at several corners to help add new bike parking throughout the area. The gateway signage, that blue sign is somewhat similar to slow zone signage, which would be included at each block entry to highlight that change and expectation to drivers. And I wanted to note here for these particular intersections on this slide, given the conditions such as the street width, bus routes that are intersecting, access to some key locations such as the school, we're not diverting traffic off the street, but we are just heavily discouraging that cut through traffic through design. So next, a little bit different from that, another intersection treatment that would be used at 6th Avenue includes mini roundabouts and a traffic diverter sort of combined design. This is where we have a little more room to work with, since the intersections here on 6th Ave don't have traffic signals, there's no bus route, vehicle volumes are quite light. This is the lowest or the quietest part of 21st Street in terms of traffic. So because of this, the intersections don't meet criteria for traffic signals, and we do see some cut through traffic along the corridor to skip the lights on 5th Ave. So first, the mini roundabouts have been introduced elsewhere in the city with an example on the upper right shown of Greeley Avenue in Staten Island. And our design builds upon that example by adding a pedestrian island crossing extension. And then I'll walk through how that works with this image on the bottom. So on the lower right, where the bike boulevard on 21st Street would meet up with 6th Avenue, we propose a full traffic diverter with the pedestrian crossing islands. So how that works is that vehicles traveling east on 21st would need to turn right onto 6th Avenue, but cyclists and pedestrians could continue straight. Vehicles could still access that last block of 21st Street. If they are traveling north on 6th Avenue, they could turn right onto 21st to still access their block. And again, traffic volumes here are quite low. At this particular intersection, in the AM peak, we actually saw a much higher volume of pedestrian and cyclists crossing compared to vehicles. Also, the new pedestrian crosswalks are shown in yellow at 21st Street and 22nd Street, where there are currently no crosswalks. The circles that you see here over at 22nd and 23rd Street would still allow vehicle movements in all directions that are currently permitted. They just help to calm the speed of the turning vehicles and discourage any cut through, speeding traffic, since there are no signals there. So just to recap, that these treatments are to take a comprehensive approach to the corridors that are intersecting with, the bike boulevard and the protected bike lane to really kind of treat the whole area.
Great. Now I'll go through what this means for the larger network, particularly for the eastbound traffic. Thanks. For general traffic, there are many eastbound alternative routes that can be taken, such as 37th Street, Prospect Expressway, Prospect Park Southwest, and Flatbush Avenue, to just name a few of them. Next. Trucks, on the other hand, although they have fewer options because they have to follow the designated truck route network, still have good alternatives that serve the same eastbound traffic needs of 20th Street, such as 39th Street and Flatbush Avenue. But with the majority of the trucks, especially if they're coming from Red Hook, are most likely to take the Prospect Expressway as it helps avoid local traffic and connects directly from the I-278. We're also looking to install truck wayfinding signage in strategic areas to help direct trucks for the best routes for eastbound movements, and generally to keep the trucks from going off the truck route network as well. Next. These numbers are not set and may vary slightly for the parking changes. Parking north of the Greenwood Cemetery, as you're able to see in this image here, and from what you may experience and already have seen, are sometimes used as storage space for trucks overnight and creates unsafe conditions that can block sight lines and create safety concerns. This project will repurpose the parking here for cyclists and pedestrians shared use path. This will also address some of the concerns expressed in the Q&A. I took a peek of cyclists on riding along sidewalks by providing a dedicated lane for cyclists and pedestrians to use. It will also reduce the need for cyclists to use the sidewalk instead, since sometimes they're on the sidewalks because they feel that it's not safe riding along traffic as well. Also for this project, we're looking to repurpose some curb space right by key intersections along 20th and 21st Street for pedestrian refuge islands or curb extensions for improved visibility and improved pedestrian safety. And between the blocks of 3rd to 4th Avenue, as I mentioned earlier with the proposed design, parking on both sides of the street will be added back. And we'll also have the opportunity here to further update any curb regulations along the corridor to reflect both residential and business loading needs as well.
And so we've shown a cross-section view of those designs, but just wanted to talk a little bit more about that curb access and driveways specifically. So when we're designing, we do account for things like driveways. In places with existing driveways, we add markings such as dashed markings, channelization, and that's similar to what you would see at some of the driveways that have been recently designed with the protected bike lanes on 4th Avenue and along 9th Street. And again, this design does maintain that ability to load and unload on both sides of the street with that floating parking lane for that section of 20th and 3rd to 7th. For driveways with larger vehicle access, we design around those as well. And this design does give some more flexibility and space to work with compared to that narrow two-way condition where there's really no room for error, not much room to pull over. And then of course, with curb management tools, as Eugenia mentioned, if there's interest in some of those neighborhood loading zones or other regulation changes, we're happy to look into those as well. And since we've shown a lot of different corridors, a lot of information, just wanted to tie this back together and summarize the pedestrian benefits of this project. And as you can see here on this map on the bottom, there are pedestrian improvements included at almost every intersection that the project covers, with a number of new crosswalks as well. So first, the curb extensions, that example in the upper left, these calm the turning vehicles, they shorten the pedestrian crossing distances, and then they open up the sight lines so that drivers and pedestrians can see each other better at the intersection. Those are the orange dots on the map. Next is the floating pedestrian islands, and those are placed next to the parking protected bike lane. Those are the yellow dots on the map. Those also shorten the crossing distances. And you can see in that image in the middle, if that white car were to turn there at that intersection, they have a much better view of that stroller in the crosswalk because the sight lanes are really opened up. The third is those mini roundabouts along 6th Avenue in the blue dots. Those would help us add new crosswalks where there currently are none. And then they also build on that example in the upper right of those mini roundabouts. Finally, one additional enhancement for 7th Avenue is the inclusion of 2 new speed humps to provide a calmer corridor where their bike boulevard meets up with 7th Avenue. So when we look at protected bike lanes, reviewing the data over the years, we have gathered data for several projects showing that there's significant benefits with reducing injuries. And the biggest group that sees the most improvement is actually pedestrians. There's a 21% drop in pedestrian injuries along corridors with a protected bike lane. And then across the board, there's a 15% overall drop in crashes with injuries. So again, these proposals combined together, they address those issues with the truck route, but they also bring safety improvements as well. And so again, just to summarize all together, 20th Street would be a one-way westbound conversion proposal allowing for these conflict-reducing designs, such as upgrading to standard traveling widths for trucks, addressing those property damage and sideswipe issues with that narrow two-way truck route, and the additional roadway space can be reallocated to a parking protected bike path, which also calms the traffic by design. That shared use path proposal along the cemetery edge would help to address the lack of sidewalk, but accommodate the growing number of people walking, jogging, and biking in that area, and also for commuting, delivery, and recreation. On 21st Street, converting that corridor from Open Street to Bike Boulevard complements that proposal on 20th Street by discouraging the cut-through traffic in the area and providing also an eastbound bike connection. So thank you for your time, and we're happy to take questions.
Thank you guys very much that you were not kidding. That was a lot of information. It's interesting. There's some interesting ideas. There's a couple questions that I have. So I'll ask a few. My main concern is the eastbound traffic. I mean, it just seems to me like it's going to get shoved onto 19th Street. I understand that doing the stuff on 21st Street and having the bike boulevard will eliminate truck traffic from using that as a cut through, but 19th Street, I think, will feel the undue burden. Sending trucks to 39th Street, these are two other overburdened eastbound corridors are, I don't know how realistic that is, unless there was to be some serious work done to make sure the wayfinding signs and the truck access to the Prospect Expressway was a legitimate thing. But let's open up questions from board members first. Jeremy, you have anybody have their hands up? Board members, if you can see that, you can call on them.
I have 4 hands up so far. Members of the public, the first round goes to the board members, but members of the public could also raise their hands and you'll be called in the second round. So I have Cindy Vanden Bosch first.
Hi, thank you so much for making this proposal. And I guess I am definitely a bicyclist and I live near McDonald Avenue, and definitely have an appreciation for the number of people that I see riding their bicycles up on the sidewalk or, right next to traffic, which is not very safe, especially considering it's part of a truck route. And I guess that connects to a question that I'm sure several of my fellow board members will also have, which is that we've been asking for a comprehensive truck study about sort of the truck traffic along this truck route. And just wondering if you have if there's anything about sort of the broader network that you could speak to as it relates to the truck volume that you're seeing currently and what you're projecting to be in other places. I realize that you presented that you're hoping that trucks will take the Prospect Expressway and go south of Greenwood Cemetery, but I'm just wondering if you could speak more to whether we're actually going to get the comprehensive study and how this fits into that bigger picture.
Hi, good afternoon or good evening, Cindy. Thank you for your question. So this effort that we are here to present the community, specifically related to the 20th Street proposals, actually has been based on a comprehensive analysis of truck volumes. As Eileen identified earlier on, these proposals are anchored to the strategic plans that we have released as part of our agency effort. So our smart truck management plan actually does have a lot of information in there about citywide truck route volumes on particular corridors. As a particular example, let's see if I can pull this up really quickly. The volume, we have borough profiles in the smart truck management plan, which can be viewed at newyorkcity.gov/smarttruck, that give you an example of similar types of truck route corridors and the daily truck volumes that are usually traversing those corridors. 20th Street actually falls on the lower end in terms of truck volumes compared to other corridors in the district, like 3rd Avenue or 4th Avenue. So we certainly think that a combination of the wayfinding signage, as Eugenia identified, in addition to increased enforcement, will certainly help to drive compliance. And that is a key part of this proposal as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm very curious how increased enforcement will work. John DeLuper, you are next.
All right. So yeah, as Zach said, a lot of information, lots of process here. And I do want to say that I appreciate the efforts of DOT to make these sections safer for all road users and to do things like reducing truck volume and congestion. I also am hopeful with some of these, your hope that this will reduce some of the illegal overnight parking of trucks, because I think that's a problem throughout the area. And if this works well, hopefully it'll be a model we can follow. I do want to say that I love some of the ideas there that you had for curb extensions. I do a lot of walking with my kids, one of whom is in a stroller, and the curb extensions make crossing with a stroller much easier, and they also increase visibility so we can see cars coming. That said, I do ask or urge you guys to consider making them out of concrete. There was a lot of talk about painted ones, and the painted ones often get ignored by cars, and that can actually make the crosswalk harder to do because they will park right into the crosswalk. For also, on a related note, for the bollards, are those going to be the little plastic ones like on 4th Avenue, or are they going to be some of the real deal metal or concrete bollards like we see throughout the city? Right now, those little plastic sticks seem to get run over everywhere, and they stop being effective after a couple weeks. For the diverters, I'm intrigued by this, and I do want to also mention, or I want to ask a few other questions about the bus. I know there are a couple bus routes that go through there, and well, actually, I guess that's I asked you a lot of questions, so I should give you time to respond, and I can come back to more.
Sure, I'd be happy to take these first few questions. Let's start with the curb extensions. Yes, for the curb extensions, yes, they would have the perimeter of delineators, but something that's a little hard to see here is that on many of these, we would be including bike parking corrals in the space just past the crosswalk, just so the crosswalk is not blocked. So those would actually really help to fortify those curb extensions and prevent the parking from occurring there. There are the opportunities for us to bring planters to these as well. They do require maintenance partners. So that's something that, we'd be happy to look into further if we could, get maintenance involved for some of those corners along 21st Street and certainly some of the others as well. And in terms of concrete, since this is new, this is different with the bike boulevard, we do want to start with, some of the more temporary materials at all those large curb extensions. If they're really successful, then, that's something we can look at in the future as well. But in terms of the resources, unfortunately, we're not able to do the concrete at all of these locations. The diverter island would be concrete. And it sounded like you had some questions on that next. For the bollards, do you have an example image? I don't know if you can see this here. This is quick curb. So it's a little bit different than just the delineators. It has like a base that's continuous with these small bollards on top of it. So it's a bit sturdier than the delineators alone if it's along an edge. And so for this section here, and also for the 10th Ave section, that's what we would be pursuing. We're continuing to look at whether the concrete Jersey barriers are an option, but we do review these with FDNY, and at some locations, they like to keep the flexibility in case they need to access the lane, as a passing lane. So that's something we'll continue to look at. But to start with would be majority, mostly quick curb, most likely here. And then you mentioned there was a question on the diverters.
Well, I mentioned with the diverters, how would that work for I believe that there's 3 or 4 buses that go through that area, right? Would that impact the traffic for those?
So the diverter is proposed only for 6th Avenue at 21st Street. So the 6th Avenue section here does not have a bus route, and 21st Street does not have a bus route. So this area, these diverters would not impact the bus routes. These other designs also, so there's no buses traveling along 21st Street, city buses, for designing that corner near the Al Noor School, we'll check those turns to make sure that turn still works off of 4th Avenue if there are buses turning there. But the bus routes go along 4th, 5th, and 3rd here. And that's part of why we're not able to really include these kind of islands in the middle of the intersection, because we need to keep the straight paths for the buses there. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that there was some also a little further up by past Greenwood Cemetery too, right? Is it the 103 or one? There's, I feel like my memory could be wrong, but I think there's a couple routes up in that area too. And with these lanes and stuff, I was just curious if that would impact it.
So 20th Street along the cemetery edge, yes, there's the 67 and the 69 that do travel, and they would still have access. Their bus stops are on the north side of the street, so it would be away from the bike path. And then there's that corner here where for the southbound bus stop, that would get relocated and built out in concrete. And that's also for the B67 and 69. If there's any other buses that are traveling through the area along 20th or 10th, they're still able to travel along those spaces. We do have to check the turns, not only for trucks, but also buses. So that would still work. But the diverter doesn't really overlap with the bus routes.
Okay. Glad to hear. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I have Nick Azadian next.
Good evening. I'd like to thank you guys for putting together this presentation. There's a lot of information here. I have a couple of questions. The first one is, what is the net amount of reduced parking based on the revisions that you guys are proposing?
The net amount is about 130, but majority of that is coming from the northern curb of Greenwood Cemetery, where that will be repurposed for the two-way shared use path, and with some additional repurposing of like at the corners and at like the key intersections, so that we can install some painted curb extensions and pedestrian refuge islands.
I got you. So basically it's a net loss of 130 spaces along the corridor, primarily around Greenwood Cemetery.
Right. If this is fully parked with an average car length vehicle.
Gotcha. The second question I have is really in relation to the truck study, which we're probably not going to get. What data was used when compiling this information in terms of traffic? And was any thought made for what inevitably will be the installation of quite a few of the last mile distribution warehouses in Red Hook and Sunset Park?
So the study in itself, the project has, we know that there have been requests from the community over the years, and we have been in communication with the community. We have updated data collection and analyses. Luckily for the agency, we have been able to look at more of the origin and destinations for commercial vehicles and actually have included that in our analysis. We've also collected truck volumes and counts as well along the corridor that have actually been included in our traffic analysis. We need to make sure that this works before we can actually come to you confidently and speak about this proposal. So these are all elements that actually have been pulled into the analysis for this project. We do have a slide at the end, I believe, that in our appendix that speaks to the traffic volumes, and we can certainly talk through some of that as well. Eugenia, do you want to highlight some of that?
Is this the slide?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is just a slide of just showing the vehicle volumes and broken down by all vehicles, but also trucks going westbound on 20th Street. So as you can kind of see here, there's a lot of numbers, I know, but majority of the traffic is going westbound. Most of them that are going west, the vehicles that are more likely to travel the entire corridor are going westbound, with the eastbound traffic tend to do shorter trips along the corridor. And with the close proximity of 20th Street to the Prospect Expressway, vehicles are able to take the on-ramps on 17th Street and 4th Avenue, or 19th Street and 7th Avenue for an alternative as well.
The basis of my question was more so the data, but then also what future expansion was essentially built into these plans. Because, if you're looking at, past data, that's not necessarily reflective of what we're going to be dealing with when all of those facilities come online. And so I know it's very difficult to project on a system as vast as New York City's transit system, but there has to be some kind of implication to see what is going to happen.
Your point is well taken, and we certainly commit to doing continued monitoring as these facilities come online to determine where else we need to think about traffic mitigation solutions. However, these are all incremental changes that certainly help to improve safety and efficiency of the network as it exists today. We have we know that this has come up in previous discussions, particularly for the CB6, CB7 committee meeting that was held 2 weeks ago. More than likely, we'd expect more of the vehicles to use the main avenues to access that facility, and particularly corridors that are adjacent to the interstate system. But again, this is something that DOT is continuing to evaluate as well as we see these facilities come online.
As a last comment, and then I'll listen to everybody else, I would heavily suggest publicizing the statistics and how you guys make these decisions. Diagrams like this would be very, very useful for the public to see, to understand how these decisions are made, because there is a perception where a lot of the decisions are made not necessarily arbitrarily, but without input, where, I'm imagining there are quite a few smart people doing analysis on this and then coming to a conclusion as to why you're proposing these items.
Yeah, your point is well taken, and sorry not to belabor the point. I know there are other folks that have questions, but to your point, we do a very thorough traffic analysis, especially for major transportation projects, where we look at the AM and PM peak periods, and to look at the activity for all of those corridors. We also look at pedestrian movements as well as bicycle movements, and ensure that the level of service is palatable as well, and making sure that we're not creating adverse impacts. So this is a critical part of our analysis. We'd be more than happy to share kind of like what that process looks like in general, after this call.
Thank you.
So I have Roberto A. Martinez next.
Yeah, hello. Basically, they answered the question when they addressed John DeLuca's question, because I'm a bus operator, and I know the B67, the B69 runs along 19th Street and 20th Street. Then you have the B61 and the B68 that uses those streets to run onto the route, to commence the route. So you basically covered it, but my thing is, has the MTA Transit Authority been apprised of this? Because like I said, it seems in TA, they're always the last ones to know. And how does that affect me? I'm a bus operator, like I said, it affects scheduling. And when you have this type of volume shifting, right, the percentage of accidents go up. And then with bicycles, it's not considered a vehicle accident and there's more fatalities. So that's my concern. Is the MTA abreast of this as of now?
Yes, to answer your question, we do review these with MTA and New York City Transit staff. Once the design is finalized, we'll also be sharing that with them as well as a timeline so that bus operators could be updated as well. And I think I mentioned earlier, but I just wanted to reiterate that we also do test all of the turns with any new curb extensions to make sure that they work for the vehicles traveling along them. So you'll notice here that that's why we don't have one here at Prospect Park West. So, you know, some of them just don't fit, but we do check those. You know, one of the benefits of this project too is it does give a bit more space. So there's a little bit less of those issues of being stuck with some of those standoffs between the vehicles that can't pass each other. So hopefully this helps to improve operations there too.
Good. But it's good presentation.
Thank you.
I have Zach JC next. Zach, after you. I don't have other committee members, but I do have some attendees. So after you, could I start calling them as well?
Yes, that would be great. I just wanted to, I feel like we're glossing over the impact that it's going to have on 19th Street. It's just inevitable. And we look at 9th and 10th Streets as brought up in the chain of questions, but 19th Street is going to become the eastbound corridor, the cut through. I understand what you're doing on 21st Street, so people can't use that as the cut through, but no precautions are being taken on 19th Street because there are already bus routes. So 19th Street is going to be overburdened by the eastbound truck traffic. And I don't see any way how that's not going to be the outcome. We know we can't rely on enforcement. This community suffers from a lack of enforcement on all these issues. That's why the painted curb extensions will not work. They have to be made more permanent because people park in the curb extensions every night on 4th Avenue. The same people park in the curb extensions and they never get tickets. But if you could just speak a little bit more about it, how you think 19th Street is going to not become the eastbound corridor. I would be interested.
Yeah, so 19th Street is narrower than a typical truck route, and also with the presence of the speed humps in front of the schools and along the corridor, it can help deter truck traffic, the unwanted truck traffic as well. And also, we're looking into putting together a wayfinding signage plan so that trucks are able to direct to the close nearby truck routes that they can use instead of going off route. But also DOT has an ongoing and deep safety sets of toolkit that we can also use to help improve any safety concerns that we see arise.
I think some things like that should be included. There should be speed humps. We should look at turnaround ideas along 19th Street because there's no way to prevent that unless there are means taken. But let's turn over the questions to the attendees.
Hi, Zach. Just before you continue,
Yeah.
I just also wanted to highlight. So adding on to Eugenia's points as well, we certainly, again, this is really the start of the conversation, continuing to look at how we can improve safety within this area and in the district. We are also in coordination and discussion with NYPD at the precinct level to look at areas where we can do more stepped up enforcement. And that certainly, I think, is something that's definitely on the table. I know that in the past, the community has expressed frustration with the lack of enforcement, but we've had more recent conversations to give us a little bit more insights on that. So we are working directly with NYPD to see increased enforcement once this, should we move forward with the project.
Great. Thank you.
Zach, I'll move on to attendees now. I have
Please.
a couple of questions as well. I will wait until after the attendees if you allow that. I have Kevin Hardiman next. Kevin, you can unmute yourself.
Thanks. I've got a question and a concern. If I can cover both, I would appreciate it. So the first question is that this is a relatively complex plan that's covering a number of streets and avenues. And it seems that it's all accommodating the fact that there's truck traffic on 20th Street. It seems like the easiest resolution would be to just eliminate the truck traffic from 20th Street altogether. Has that been given some consideration in this planning? And if not, I'd love to hear why. The second concern, and this is actually just a sort of a good thing of having two-way truck traffic on a narrow street, is that these vehicles actually can't travel, I would say, faster than, say, 10 or 15 miles an hour. With the proposed plan, with the dedicated lane, especially going downhill in one direction, is encouraging these vehicles, I think, to not only go at speed, but above speed. I'd love to hear if this has been considered as part of the plan, the excessive speed of large vehicles. Thank you.
So I can first speak to the protected bike lane design here. We have used this on a number of other streets that experience truck travel, also on some truck routes. And we do find that just by the nature of this design that you can see at the bottom, it does slow the vehicles to, they have to travel the speed limit. Those issues with two-way current conditions, yes, the vehicles are going slower if they're passing each other, but sometimes it's so bad that they can't pass each other, and then there are backups, and then there are safety concerns. But just to speak to that one-way route, here you can see that it's a standard lane width. It's more room for the truck, but it's still, constraining and calming those movements a bit to keep them traveling more carefully on the downhill. And then regarding the truck route, maybe Freight can speak to, that question on 20th being eliminated as a truck route option.
Yeah, so sorry, the removal of the truck route question. We want to maintain the truck route network just so that businesses along the corridor is still able to access and do their deliveries and their operations. But with this proposal, we're able to reduce the number of truck traffic that you'll be seeing along the whole corridors with this one-way conversion as well. I know there was a question about the geometry of 36th Street and 37th Street. Why haven't we looked into that? There are some geometric constraints over there for trucks to be able to turn safely.
I have Martin Fuchs next. Martin, you could unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Thank you for all the information you're presenting. It's just a minor question out of curiosity. I saw that at the intersection of 6th Avenue and 23rd, as well as 22nd Street, you're going to put this mini roundabout, but at the intersection of 6th Avenue and 21st, it will be a diverter. Can you maybe explain why that is? Thank you very much.
All right, sure, I can speak to this slide. So basically, the concept behind the diverter is to, further reduce the volumes along the bike boulevard. As I mentioned before, we can't pursue that on some of those other avenues that have truck routes. Sorry, not truck routes, bus routes traveling along the street. So here, that is the most robust treatment that we can include with the bike boulevard. This image in the upper left is an example of what some other cities have pursued with these things that allow bikes to pass through, but then it kind of filters out the extra vehicle traffic. So the thought here is just deterring people from, skipping the lights on 5th Ave, cutting through this 6th Ave corridor and continuing up to 7th. We are being a bit more permissive over here at 23rd and 22nd so that there is still more circulation available people could use, the street grid as it's designed to be able to, turn around, access, 21st for the last block. So, it's a little bit more stringent here for this location since it's the bike boulevard. But then these other mini roundabouts are to help just kind of calm that traffic on the rest of the corridor and then add these crossings too. Does that answer your question?
I'm sorry, I removed his permission to talk. You can raise your hand again, though, and I will call on you unless she has answered your question. I have.
That did sound like you answered it. Yes.
Thank you.
I do have Roger Melzer next. Roger, you can unmute yourself. Roger?
Yep, he's on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Roger Melzer, and I do have an apartment building in the Windsor Terrace neighborhood. One of my concerns is there are a lot of businesses along the 3rd Avenue corridor from 20th to 30th Street, a cement plant, FedEx. I see them using 20th Street going eastbound. And also with the last mile distribution centers being planned, there's going to be even more demand for eastbound access in Brooklyn. And I feel this proposal will have unanticipated effects on adjacent neighborhoods as all these trucks seek more direct routes than through the theoretical routes that you have planned or that you think that it will take in the future. For example, in Community Board 6, since southbound traffic on 9th Street cannot turn left on 9th Street to go up 9th Street, residents on 10th Street are now complaining about added vehicle traffic, including trucks going up the residential blocks up to 7th Avenue. It's quite likely that the same thing will happen like to streets like Prospect Avenue in the Windsor Terrace neighborhood above 6th Avenue, which is a two-way street. I also know that the elementary school and middle schools on 19th and 20th Streets create big traffic jams up both from school buses and parents double parking during the 9 months of the school year, which creates, just additional jam ups for vehicles in the neighborhood. And nobody's even mentioned the school so far. I think the easiest solution is just to eliminate parking on one street of 20th Street, on one side of 20th Street, from 3rd Avenue up to McDonald Avenue, try to improve the sidewalk on the cemetery side, get it by, your bike lane in there. But I just feel that 20th Street has been a traditional critical truck route and vehicle route from along 3rd Avenue, up into central Brooklyn. I can say when they eliminated traffic going through Prospect Park, up Flatbush Avenue, to get to other parts of central and eastern Brooklyn, the traffic on Prospect Park just is voluminous in the rush hours, particularly, even in the morning. So that sort of concludes my comments, but I think, eliminating the eastbound truck access along 20th Street is going to have some incredible unanticipated effects on the neighborhood. I can also say that seeing roundabouts in other places, if a truck or even a delivery vehicle has a problem, they just have to run over the roundabout. It's not some sacred space in the middle of an intersection that's not going to create problems. And even at nighttime, if it's not well illuminated, cars might go smashing right in through it, not even knowing that it exists until the last minute when it's too late. So again, to conclude, I think 20th Street should remain a two-way street. Might be an unpopular point of view, but I don't think the people that live on 19th, 21st, 22nd, and 23rd and 24th Streets probably have much input into this decision other than the few people that have perhaps spoken tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Zach, I have one other panelist hand up right now, and I'm happy to call on them, and then I hope you will indulge me with a couple of questions. I have John DeLuper next.
Okay.
John?
Yes. Sorry. Wanted to ask one and a half really quick follow-up questions. For the pedestrian, or you mentioned a lot of improvements for pedestrians and cyclists and drivers on this, but I did want to ask an accessibility question. You mentioned the 5-foot long sidewalks are not adequate. With these upgrades, are there going to be other ones like fixes to curb cuts and stuff? I know since the route starts down by 3rd Avenue, 3rd Avenue and 20th Street, last time I looked at it, didn't even have curb cuts. And, you know, the medians there were pretty not good. You know, definitely inadequate for the pedestrians who cross there. And also on 10th and 11th Avenue, you had them be a combined lane with pedestrians and cyclists together, but the rest of it is either the cyclists are in the center or there's parking protected lanes. Is there any consideration for swapping that arrangement so the bike lane there was also parking protected instead of having to have it shared where the pedestrians and the cyclists might be getting into conflicts?
To answer the question on the curb cuts and some of those accessibility improvements, in the locations where we're doing concrete work, we would be upgrading the ramps in those intersections. So that would be these locations on 6th Avenue and then on that corner at 10th Avenue, that intersection. We could look into what's going on with the lack of ramps at 3rd and 20th and see if there are plans to fix those soon. That might be the case. So we could take a closer look at that. For the path that's shared with cyclists and pedestrians, we are a bit constrained for space. If we were to include floating parking here, then it's a little bit too narrow to be able to designate it as a pedestrian path shared with bikes. It has to meet a certain minimum, and we wouldn't be able to meet that. So that's part of the challenge there. This has been reviewed by.
Swap the parking that's on the left side there with the travel lane. Then.
Oh, you mean to just switch these two?
Yeah.
So I think, you know, we haven't included that in the design because it does create some challenges for turning on and off the street from that curb side. So that's, you know, sometimes people coming out of the driveway, you know, that parking might have to get cleared just so that turn could be made. So that's a bit of the challenge there. And where we can, we try to keep the parking against the curb for the businesses there, since on this side, there are not really any curb access needs for parking. So that's the reason that we kept it on that side in this proposal.
Okay, makes sense. Sounds good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have another attendee with their hand up. I have Gerald Mulvaney. You can unmute yourself. Jerry? Jerry, you seem to be unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay, so I know he says his mic's not working in the Q&A. He agrees with the earlier speaker, 20th Street should remain two-way. Eastbound traffic is going to create more congestion all around our neighborhood with this plan. So Jerry, I got your question out, or your concern out. I'm sorry about that. I don't know why you're not able to speak. I have Spencer Leaf next. Spencer, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, I just wanted to be a voice for a resident of 20th Street and say thank you for the continued efforts to try and solve a really unsafe and unpleasant condition living with all of this truck traffic. And just say that I fully support the one-way travel and would really appreciate the continued effort to try and alleviate all of the truck traffic that we have to deal with as residents on 20th Street.
Thank you, Spencer. Zach, I see no additional hands up. May I ask a couple of questions?
Jeremy, you have the floor.
Thank you. So back when we originally wrote about 20th Street and asked for a study, part of the concern was about the subsurface conditions. The residents were complaining about vibrations from oversized trucks. Could you tell us about the vibration studies that went along with this?
There was no vibration study as part of the effort that we have done to
I ask why not, because part of the concern was about the damage being caused to people's homes by oversized trucks. I heard nothing about enforcement on oversized trucks.
Well, we did mention that enforcement will be a part of this larger conversation. The conflict reducing designs that we are proposing as part of this proposal also helps to restrict the types of vehicles that we likely see on this street. I know that has been a larger issue in terms of the oversized 53-foot trailers that have been navigating the area, and so that is something that we have had discussions with NYPD about. Specifically on the subsurface conditions, Emily, are you on this? I know we did look into the street was resurfaced recently, and I know we looked at some additional measures here.
Yeah, so the street was resurfaced recently. Our roadway repair and maintenance did not. Your original question was concerns about the cobblestone underneath the roadway. Our roadway repair and maintenance group did not find that there were cobblestones underneath, but the roadway has been added to a future capital reconstruction.
What and when is that future capital reconstruction?
So it's on our radar, but there's no definitive information to give you at this.
So let me point out, we're also waiting for our future capital reconstruction of Fifth Avenue since 1988. So without having a date here, I don't really consider that a promise. Even when we have a date, that's not really a promise.
So for our typical, sorry, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. So one, when it comes to the building project, for DOT, we would have to talk to the Department of Buildings and maybe to you if there is like damage done to actual buildings. We don't necessarily do vibration studies to see that damage. We'd have to work with them, and also it'd be good to have structural engineers to verify whether there's been damage to structures, and that's something that we're not aware of. And if you are, you know examples of that, you can let us know. We can talk to DOB to have further conversations about that. And
I knew those residents 12 years ago. I don't know if they're still there.
Yeah, well, we'd be happy to re-engage that conversation, Jeremy. But like I said, we don't investigate off property unless we, see something here. We didn't do a study because we don't have evidence of it. And as far as the capital project is concerned, like Emily said, it's a new need. Got to look for funding, and that's the where it is right now.
Second, with regard to the Wayfinder signs, there was a Brooklyn truck route study in 2008 that the only thing it proposed for our district was Wayfinder signs, and we never got them. So are we going to get those too?
That study is based on recommendations where a lot of the conditions have changed in some shape or form. So our updated analysis would take into account proposals that were considered in the past. But again, it's important to understand that we need to assess this with the current conditions, which is what this proposal does.
I guess the theme of what I'm saying is we've been made promises in the past for some of these things that never materialized, and then we're hearing some of the same promises that never materialized. So I'm wondering how realistic these promises are, but two, since we never got them in the past, how necessary they are.
I understand your frustration, and again, we are coming here with a concerted effort to present this proposal, and are prepared to implement these changes, to improve the district. The freight mobility unit specifically, in which we've said publicly in the past, has had differences in terms of personnel over the years. But however, we have made sure that the unit is staffed up. In the previous years, when there were recommendations, there were only 2 dedicated staff to working on freight mobility related issues. So that is very different today. And as I can assure you, we are committed to addressing freight, not just in your district, but citywide. It is an issue that that we know that there needs to be commitments in this area, and that is also anchored by the mayor's announcement for our plan and the recommendations in the plan.
And I also want to say that we hear you, Jeremy, and then the other people who've asked sort of the similar questions, like where is this truck going, eastbound traffic, what are you going to do? So I think one of the things we need to do is make sure before anything happens that you see like what our sign plan is and what we are planning to do to make sure the trucks are diverted. So I hear this concerns about Prospect Park Southwest. I hear concerns about 19th Street. How are we going to try to make that not happen? So that's something we will get more details on before anything moves forward.
Right, especially 19th Street, because we've talked a little bit about it, but it is actually going to be the country's largest last mile distribution center, and I am just curious where you think those trucks are going to go if not up 19th Street. The first place that they could get on the Prospect Expressway is at 7th Avenue, and I'm curious how they're going to get to 7th Avenue. Let me quickly say we've been asking for increased enforcement on 20th Street for 11 years, haven't gotten it. Curious how DOT is going to get it, and I have not heard about implementation. When do you plan to implement?
So the goal for implementation would be starting in the fall of this year. And to the enforcement questions, perhaps Reed can weigh in on that.
Yeah, so as I alluded to, our agencies have had more recent conversations around increasing enforcement for trucks, and this is citywide. But what we are doing is we are assessing specific locations at the precinct level where we would want to work with PD to do specialized enforcement for trucks.
And so the fall is next month, so September, October, November. When do you expect it?
So
I think,
Jeremy, I can help answer that one. Of course, we have the 45-day notification law, so we wouldn't be able to start until mid-September. But we're hoping for October, September, October. That's the goal. There's a lot of
month and a half, two and a half months, something like that.
Something like that. I mean,
reiterate what was said. This is the start of a conversation, right?
That's correct. That's what I'm trying. Yeah. So first of all, want to say we're happy that CB7 allowed us to give this presentation in August, and we appreciate that and thank you for it. But we obviously take the board's suggestions and the feedback, not only what we're hearing today, but we're sure we're going to hear a lot more in the weeks to come, so that can inform our program and make changes and adjustments that we need to make before we move forward. So we're expecting that that's going to happen. That's why, again, we thank you for actually allowing us to speak in August to you about this plan, so that we are hearing things already tonight that already is in my mind saying there may be some things we need to tweak. So yes, John.
Thank you. Is
So
there 4 additional hands up?
Yes, and you're not looking for our approval. You're just this is informational. or?
So we're not,
sure.
correct, Zach, we're not asking for a vote. This is informational, but again, we do want to get community feedback on the program. And so we're coming to the board, we're talking to elected officials, we're happy, talk to other parties as needed about the plan.
But as far as the DOT is concerned, you guys are moving ahead with this plan that you're presenting. This is your.
At this time, we are planning on moving forward, but again, depending on the feedback we get, not only tonight, but the feedback we may get in the future and other things we may hear, that may change. But that is the current plan, yes, as of August the 3rd, but it could change.
But we would love, because you said the information about 19th Street and the wayfinding signs and the stuff you just alluded to. We would love that information to understand how that's going to work and how that's going to be implemented. Because as Jeremy said, and as you know, oftentimes these things are talked about, but they don't appear.
Yeah,
Yes,
and thank you for that. I'm sorry, whoever I cut off. Go first, please.
No, I was just saying you're free to send me an email and I will look into it as soon as I can to get you more information.
About, I'm speaking about what Keith had just said, that he was we were going to be given information about what steps were going to be taken for 19th Street, for example, and making sure the wayfinding signs existed and these things. So I just wanted to know when you guys were going to follow up with us about that. There's nothing I needed to email you about.
Yes, that's something I can follow up with you.
We will definitely follow up, and on top of that, just another question I saw in the chat, this presentation is going to be on our website sometime tomorrow, just so you know.
Yes, thank you very much. And if you guys could share the PDF with us as always, that would be.
And the presentation is also being live streamed on the Brooklyn Community Board 7 YouTube page and will be available in perpetuity. Zach, I have a couple of more hands up. Keith, I'd just like to clarify, this is a single project, right? This is one project here, 20th and 21st. It's not two separate projects?
They're tied.
Okay.
They're tied together. They're in sync.
Okay, thank you. I have Nick Azadian next.
Keith, this is more so directed to you and the rest of DOT. And, my question is how do we ensure that the items that are being discussed today and the various promises that are being made are followed through on? And before you respond, I just want you to know that as we've talked about many times, there have been many promises over the years that routinely fall through. And we would like for that to stop happening. And I'm trying to be very polite about it. In other meetings, I've been significantly more terse, but we would like to see positive, movement on these issues. And I would like to know how you will see these things through and the DOT will actually see these things through, rather than us attending these meetings, having these conversations, and then having to have the same conversation 6 months from now about the same item that was promised or discussed that still does not happen.
So, yes, and thank you. And I do obviously remember our conversation a couple weeks ago. So for this specific project, again, the feedback that we're going to have, we are going to make sure, I'm going to make sure, and my office is going to follow up with me, that the things we discussed and we know that you're looking for already, we're going to get to you before anything happens. I can say to you internally, when we're talking about this project and we were planning it, one of the biggest topics that we had was the eastbound traffic and what was going to happen to it. And so that was talked about extensively internally, because we knew that was going to be one great fear of a lot of people, is that, you're changing truck route, where all those trucks are going to go eastbound. That's something, what Denise and Hena was telling earlier about traffic analysis, what we're doing. That's why that was done for a project anyway, but that's why we're doing it. And so we've done it for this project. And again, we're going to follow through to make sure it works right. And that's what we're going to do. And that's what I'm saying we're going to do. So until your the larger truck issues, that some that have been in some of the chats as well, that's sort of different. And I think to that, I think bigger question needs to be asked. You know, we understand people are looking for DOT to have a truck study. And again, as Denise said, we have some data out there on the internet that we should probably get to you so you see what we're talking about, the STMP, the new STMP, I should say. But one of the things and it's also about even the joint CB6 and CB7 committee, we need to talk about more discrete goals about when you talk about a study, what are we talking about? And again, it's probably not this committee meeting, Nick. It probably needs to be done another thing, but it's sort of like, what are you saying? I mean, so as the right facilities are gonna come, vehicles are gonna come. So what are you looking for? That's what I'm sort of saying. So what are we looking for? And again, I think this is a conversation not for this meeting tonight, but that's sort of what direction DOT would be helpful because, you know, big facilities come and, you know, the only role DOT has and as the right facility when a big facility comes is literally when the Department of Buildings comes up and says, this facility is going to have curb cuts. Can you review the curb cuts? That's it.
I understand that. I think the question that I really had and really the comment is really just trying to reestablish trust with the DOT, ensuring that when you guys say you're going to do something, it happens, which I think you've addressed very well just now. And I sincerely hope that you guys follow through on it. And we can most certainly discuss the trucking issues associated with last mile in the appropriate meetings. I don't want to take up any more time on that particular issue tonight, but thank you for your candor and thank you for the response. And I sincerely hope that we move forward positively on this.
Thanks, Nick. Sorry about the longer answer.
I have another question or a comment from an attendee, Roger Melzer. Roger, you could unmute yourself.
Actually, it's Jasmine Melzer, his wife. I'm on the board of Good Neighbors of Park Slope, and I've been on other calls with the DOT concerning things like Prospect Park West, Park Circle, and the DOT recently said they provide the signage and it's up to the NYPD to enforce it. And the NYPD is clueless about what they're supposed to be enforcing. So there's been a lot of conversation tonight about enforcement, truck enforcement, and so on. So how do the two agencies work together and how do you ensure that there's some enforcement?
So in the past, when we do enforcement with the NYPD, we work with, they actually have a truck enforcement unit that we will sometimes work with. They know the rules well. And we'll work with them on operations throughout the city to do enforcement for truck route violations or issues with trucks. Also, at the precinct level, is usually more of an education campaign. In the past, we actually used to have pamphlets with cards that said about the truck route rules, how you can enforce the actual enforcement code, what were the truck routes in your precinct. So we gave these out. This is something that we went away from, but probably need to go to again and just start working with the precincts, with the traffic safety officer, the training sergeant, whoever does traffic training in the precinct, to talk to them about that and to get them there. Because you can always talk to the CO and the XOs of the precinct, but they move around so much. You know, it's good to just actually go to the lieutenant and sergeant officer level, and that gives them more consistency. So that's something I think would be appropriate here. I mean, for 7.2, and I think citywide is something we should look at again as well. I don't know if he says anything.
Well, thank you. Now my husband, Roger, wants to add to that.
Yeah, well, I have little faith in the 72nd precinct in doing any truck enforcement, no matter what the problem is. And I'm going to allude to something else. We've had a rash of the apartment buildings in Windsor Terrace and Coulommiers having mailbox break-ins. And I know, and we called the 72nd precinct to respond to this problem. They never showed up the building on the last time it happened. So I just think the precincts are overwhelmed with crime problems, homeless problems, all the other calls that they get. To think that a local precinct is going to have any impact or involvement in truck enforcement is really pie in the sky. I just think they're overwhelmed with what they have to do already. And truck enforcement in a little neighborhood is not going to be something that you can get a precinct to respond to, even if the captain, the commanding officer says, oh yes, we'll be involved. There's just too many other problems they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, 24/7. And that's my comment on the precinct. Thank you.
Thank you, Jasmine and Roger. Zach, I don't have additional hands up, but I believe Natasha has a question or two that was put in the Q&A.
Great. Please go ahead,
Natasha.
Natasha.
Hi. So Gerald Mulvaney wants to know if the residents on 20th and 21st Street have been polled on these changes or these proposed changes.
They haven't been, but we're happy to receive their feedback. And there's a mechanism to get that beyond just community board presentation. And obviously there's a YouTube channel that Jeremy alluded to, so they're going to see everything we're saying so far. We're happy to hear their follow-up. And obviously Emily in my office is there to take any questions or concerns that they may have.
If the residents wanted to give DOT feedback, how would they do that? Would they do it by email or by going?
It'd be good to email Emily to let her know, and then she'll pass it on to the team.
Okay, thank you.
Zach, there are no additional hands up. It's up to you.
Okay, well, thank you for allowing us to have this discussion and everybody speaking with candor and speaking their minds. And I think this is a good first discussion. I guess you guys are moving on with this, and you just let us know your timeline. Of course, this committee couldn't even vote over the Zoom format now, and then we have to be in person. I do think as a committee we should spend a couple of days and get our thoughts together, and then we can reconvene at a later date and put together a resolution in the next couple of weeks. How we like what our response would be to this. But I think if with no further questions, nobody has any objections, I guess this meeting would be adjourned.
Thank you, Zach.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, very much. Have a great night.
Thanks for coming, everybody. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.